Good morning and welcome to the Namibia Qualifications Authority Virtual Summit 2020 under the theme, The Dimensions of Quality Assurance in Education During COVID-19, live from Windhoek, Namibia. The NQA, as an agent for quality assurance in education in Namibia, is proud to host this virtual summit that brings together all stakeholders in education to, among others, deliberate on dimensions of quality assurance in the new normal, share practices undertaken since the existence of the pandemic, and develop strategies to the way or for the way forward in solidarity. I'm Rochelle Locke, and I'm pleased to lead the proceedings as Program Director. In observing the national response measures as outlined in the Minister of Health and Social Services directives on public health COVID-19 regulations, we call on our guests in attendance here at the summit venue to kindly adhere by wearing your mask and keeping a safe distance as far as possible throughout the summit. For your information, I have asked to be exempted from wearing my mask due to health reasons, so I will remove it during the course of our program. I would now like to take this opportunity and introduce you to our guests in attendance. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Itah Kandjii-Murangi, the Honourable Minister of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation. Professor Anisha Peters, Deputy Chairperson of the NQA Council and also our panel moderator this morning. Dr. Samuel John, Member of the NQA Council. Dr. Maggie Beeker-Samis, Director, Centre for Open Distance and E-Learning at the University of Namibia. Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananuvo, the Head of Education Unit at the UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa, joining us live from Zimbabwe. Our esteemed panelists, members of the media, and last but not least, a very warm welcome to our online audience represented by various industry bodies, stakeholders, and the general public. Allow me also to give you a brief rundown of the program this morning. We will shortly be addressed by Dr. Samuel John, giving us a statement on behalf of the NQA. Thereafter, we will listen to the official opening statement delivered by Honourable Dr. Itah Kandjii-Murangi. That will be followed by our first keynote address by Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananuvo. And after that, we will listen to Dr. Maggie Beeker-Samis for the second keynote address. Our panel discussion, moderated by Professor Anisha Peters, will then follow, and our panelists this morning, together with Dr. Maggie Beeker-Samis, Ms. Carol Medal-Ananuvo, are Mr. Hipa Murangi, Ms. Eda Bon, Ms. Nhlanhla Lupahla, and Pamela Gertze. We will introduce them officially later once we get to the panel discussion. We also invite our viewers to engage with us, to add to a fruitful and rich deliberation by submitting your questions and or comments in the chat box using the hashtag NQA Virtual Summit 2020. And of course, this is live streamed on Facebook as well as YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers, the 2020 academic year has added to the Namibian history of states of emergencies after the emergence of the global COVID-19 pandemic, causing what can be described as the largest disruption of education in history. Universally, it has already an impact on learners and teachers from pre-primary to secondary schools, technical and vocational education and training institutions, universities, adult learning, and skills development establishments. According to UNESCO, about 94% of learners worldwide have been affected by the pandemic, representing 1.58 billion children and youth from pre-primary to higher education in 200 countries by mid-April 2020. Indeed, a significant number and a significant impact. The disruptions caused by COVID-19 to everyday life means that millions of children worldwide have missed out on early childhood education in their critical preschool year. In this situation, they missed a stimulating and enriching environment, learning opportunities, social interaction, and in some cases, adequate nutrition. The challenges in technical and vocational education and training systems include low levels of digitalization and long-standing structural weaknesses. Disruptions in workplaces made it difficult to implement apprenticeship schemes, internships, and work-based learning modes, which are key elements of a functional and market-responsive technical and vocational system. In higher education, while online learning has generally taken place through recorded lectures and online platforms, some universities and colleges have postponed learning and teaching due to the lack of information technology infrastructure for both students and teachers. However, the challenge remains about how to harmonize semesters and academic calendars, as some programs have been successfully implemented online, while others could either not materialize or are simply practically impossible. The education sector in Namibia, like the rest of the world, has also been affected by the COVID-19 outbreak, where schools, colleges, and universities were closed when the coronavirus was declared a public health emergency. There's been talks by the authorities to temporarily migrate to online teaching and assessment, and although this might be doable in tertiary education, it would particularly be challenging for schools with online education, since this is a new area for majority of both teachers and learners in Namibia. It is also challenging to roll out online learning for schools, specifically in rural areas with no access to electricity, IT gadgets, and internet connectivity, amongst others. Noting all the aforementioned facts, it may be concluded to have an impact on quality of education provided, therefore creating questions on assurance of this quality. During May this year, the Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation requested the Namibia Qualifications Authority to take the lead in establishing the preparedness of tertiary institutions on matters pertaining to quality assurance during the migration of courses to online learning on account of COVID-19. To fill us in on this and on behalf of the NQA, may I now hand over to Dr. Samuel John, member of the NQA Council, to address us.
Good morning. I don't know whether I should stand. Can you hear me very well? Okay, good. Well, it's my privilege to. Okay, I can stand. Thank you. It's my privilege to present this opening remarks on behalf of the Council of NQA, due to the fact that the chairperson was unable to come. So, Program Director, Honourable Dr. Itah Kandjii-Murangi, Minister of Higher Education, Training, Training and Innovation, Professor Anisha Peters, Deputy Chairperson of the NQA, and the Pro Vice Chancellor, Research, Innovation and Development, UNAM, Mr. Franz Harze, NQA Chief Executive Officer. I always have difficulty pronouncing your surname. Keynote speakers and stakeholders in the education sector, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Good morning to everyone joining us here at the NQA House and on various online platforms. On behalf of the Council and staff of the Namibian Qualifications Authority, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the NQA's virtual summit focusing on e-learning and quality assurance during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, our first ever virtual session. Thanks to the extraordinary times we find ourselves in. Just over 10 months ago, the novel coronavirus, now commonly referred to as COVID-19, shocked the world and brought life almost to a standstill. The virus spread unremittingly across villages, towns, and cities around the world. As the infection rates increased, so did the impact of the pandemic, disrupting millions of lives and livelihoods across the globe. The education sector was not spared, as the pandemic initially cut students access to education, placing the entire sector in an unprecedented predicament. Educational institutions that have for some time been discussing and debating on increasing technology use in training and teaching find themselves forced into the deep waters. When it became obvious that the pandemic was not here for a short visit, educational institutions had to abandon conventional teaching methods and transition to e-learning while managing the economic, demographic, and technological challenges that came with these changes. I have friends that used to say that they are BBC, that is born before computers. I think they find themselves really forced into to go with the flow. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the great English writer Margaret Drable that said, "When nothing is sure, everything is possible." The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed that it is possible to offer online teaching at all tiers of education. This paradigm shift in teaching method has also confirmed that digital infrastructure and internet connectivity are some of the main real estate necessary to respond to diverse students' needs and truly deliver quality education. Needless to say, fast and fundamental change is imperative for educational institutions to remain relevant and fit for purpose in this new normal. Even in these challenging times, the statutory responsibilities of the NQA has not changed. Amongst others, the NQA is mandated to accredit training providers and, through the process of quality assurance, protect the integrity of the Namibian education system. It is particularly critical in these uncertain times to ensure that quality standards are maintained regardless of the mode of delivery. It is our long-term vision to ensure the development of standards, harmonize policies, and pursue a coordinated approach to quality assurance that will ensure robustness in the face of the changing landscape within which we have to execute our core mission. This summit will draw attention to these important topics. I'm pleased to state that we have an impressive lineup of speakers and panelists representing the private and public sector to help us understand the true impact of COVID-19 and how the transition to e-learning may affect quality assurance. Ladies and gentlemen, we are dealing with the effects of a pandemic that is so serious that the IMF termed it the worst crisis since the Great Depression. This is a collective threat that requires collaboration between all key stakeholders. The ultimate purpose of this summit is to create a platform for open dialogue and for all stakeholders to bring their unique experiences and expertise to the table in order to find innovative solutions to the challenges the sector is facing. At the end of the summit, we would like to identify actionable plans and recommendations for strategies to address the immediate challenge of quality assurance and e-learning. The key points from our discussions over the next 2 hours will be recorded in a document that we hope will serve as a roadmap to addressing the challenges and taking up the opportunities presented to us as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to fail in my duty if I do not thank the following people and organizers and organizations for their continuous support, in particular in putting these events together. We are immensely grateful to everyone who positively responded to our invitation to participate in this conversation and for their voices to be heard, including our esteemed keynote speakers who were invited in their individual capacities. While we would have liked to accommodate more speakers and panelists, that would have put quite a lot of pressure on our resources. To our Honourable Minister, Dr. Kandjii-Murangi, we thank you for your consistent support and for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us in this conversation this morning. UNESCO for co-funding this summit and contributing towards capacity building in quality assurance skills and experts, not only to the NQA, but to the sector at large. I'd like to also thank our keynote speakers, Caroline Medal Anonuvo, I hope I pronounced that name correctly, and Dr. Maggie Biekes Emis, panelists, audience, turning in online, and the media. I wish to thank the organizing committee and the technical team for your hard work and diligence in putting this event together. Last but not least, it fills me with pride to warmly congratulate my colleague, the Deputy Chairperson of NQA Council, our panel moderator this morning. She's, as if she doesn't know I'm talking about her. This morning, an accomplishment leader and now a Google Award winner, Professor Anisha Peters. We're really proud of you. Professor Peters was recently awarded the Google, I believe that is Artificial Intelligence Award for Inclusion Research, a global program that supports academic research in computing and technology, addressing the needs of underrepresented populations. Congratulations, Professor Peters, for this prestigious recognition and for flying the Namibian flag high. With these short remarks, I wish you all an enjoyable and fruitful summit. I look forward to all the insightful presentations and panel discussions. And I thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuel John, for welcoming us all and making us feel at home here at the House of the NQA. If you have just joined us, you are watching the Namibia Qualifications Authority Virtual Summit 2020 under the theme, The Dimensions of Quality Assurance in Education During COVID-19, live from Windhoek here in Namibia. We invite our online community to partake in this fruitful discussion today by sending or submitting your questions and or comments in the chat box of our Facebook page. It is also live streamed on YouTube. You're welcome to send it through. Please do use the hashtag NQA Virtual Summit 2020 and join us there with some of your comments. During May 2020, the Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation, as I've mentioned earlier, requested the Namibia Qualifications Authority to take the lead in establishing the preparedness of tertiary institutions on matters pertaining to quality assurance during the migration of courses to online learning on account of COVID-19. It is against this background that a survey was conducted with the technical assistance of the Namibia Statistics Agency, to gather current information about the preparedness of institutions on matters pertaining to quality assurance during the migration of courses then to online teaching mode. In addition, the survey was aimed at ultimately devising strategies to ensure that minimum quality assurance standards are met with online teaching, learning and assessment. It now gives me great pleasure to invite the Minister of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation, Honourable Dr. Itah Kandjii-Murangi, to address us.
Thank you, Prof. You know, they say, once a teacher, always one. I wonder if I say I prefer speak talking up there, will it create problems? I hope not. Thank you, Director of Ceremonies. I hope my coming up here did not disrupt much. Director of Proceedings, Professor Gilbert Likando, the Chairperson of the NQA Council, represented this morning by Dr. Samuel John, a Council member. The UNESCO education expert, whom I hear is joining us virtually. Mr. Franz Hesse, the NQA Chief Executive Officer, speakers and panelists at this summit, heads of institutions and stakeholders in education represented here, all our invited guests, locally and virtually, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all. I'm delighted to be with you this morning here at the NQA House. I'm sure you will agree with me that 2020 has been quite a challenging year. But this virtual summit on quality assurance and e-learning will be one of the positive highlights of this year. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed unprecedented challenges to industries and economies worldwide, in one way or another. The education and training sector in Namibia has been particularly hard hit by the pandemic, with far-reaching consequences such as the extended closure of schools and institutions of higher learning, disruption of the academic calendar, and most significantly, the sudden migration to online learning, which came with its own unique set of challenges. As a ministry, we are committed to supporting training providers and students alike through the transition to e-learning. But we needed to understand the situation on the ground in order to implement evidence-based interventions. It is for that purpose that the ministry commissioned a research study to fully understand the sector's readiness to transition to e-learning. It was also imperative to identify and assess factors that may impact the delivery of quality education during the lockdowns. Following are some of the key findings from this survey. Only 28% of training providers utilize the e-learning delivery mode for learning, with 72% of the institutions still relying on the face-to-face mode of learning. I need to emphasize here that with our TVET stream, I'm sure the numbers are pretty lower here. If there is a stream that was hard hit more, was our TVET sector. Because as we know, the TVET sector is predominantly practicals, and therefore it is 70, 30, or 60, I think it's 60, 40. 60 being industry-based, and the 40% being theory at the different centers. And many of our centers were not ready for this transition. Number two, 66% of the institutions do not currently have quality assured systems for e-learning in place. And this is true mainly for our smaller colleges, TVET centers, and even, to some extent, our two public universities. That's UNAM and NAST. 53% of the institutions do not have teaching staff trained and proficient in the use of e-learning technologies and e-assessment methods. A serious challenge, obviously, that we still have to see how best this can be handled. Of course, different instructors, professors, lecturers at different institutions managed and coped, and indeed, upskilling of many was also done during this time. Only 43.8% of the institutions offer support service to students in e-learning programs, while 59.4% do not provide students with guidance or guidelines or training in the use of e-learning resources such as e-library. I think you'll all agree with me that universities are about students, supporting students, ensuring that whatever they impart, students actually learn and benefit from that. With the transition to e-learning, with these figures, it reveals that indeed our students, we have to develop programs that support our students when it comes to e-learning so that they maximize the benefit of these methods. Based on the data above, which is simply an extract from the survey findings, it is clear that COVID-19 effectively exposed the significant underlying socioeconomic challenges that were already dominant in the sector, but that may further complicate the transition to e-learning. The differences in economic status, geographic locations, appropriate resources, and access to internet and technological devices are significant challenges in our country. Add to that equation the availability of assessment policies and processes, the transparency levels and capacity of teaching staff to effectively manage online learning, and these become key challenges that may hinder the government's ability to provide equitable access to e-learning opportunities. Now, I was listening carefully when Professor John read his statement. He did also touch on the fact that, which is true, on the fact that e-learning is with us for long, maybe permanently with us. The best we can do as educators is to perfect our processes and systems of harnessing it. It is undeniable that COVID-19 has created a myriad of challenges to education and training. On the other hand, the pandemic has also presented us with extraordinary opportunities for innovation in teaching and learning, as well as the enhancement of quality assurance processes that are uniquely aligned to an ever-changing environment. I think if there is one thing that we can all say in the sector of education about COVID-19 is that it is an indictment to all educators, scientists, to come up with new strategies of providing education. Now, provision of education is not only to some, but to all, meaning we have to cater for our students from all walks of life. And this is why, as government, we have actually made it a point to say that come next year, because we know that online education will be part of us, will be part of our higher education, as well as our TVET system. We are saying for every funded student through government, such a student must be provided with the necessary equipment and technological devices. So it is for our institutions to make sure that our students, our learners, our trainees are well versed with the right competencies, the right skills to maneuver these gadgets to their benefit and benefit from the education that our institutions are providing. At this juncture, I would like to assure you, our stakeholders, the students, the public at large, that the ministry is committed to providing the necessary support to the sector to minimize further disruptions, but also ensure that quality education is delivered to all students. The ministry will be undertaking continuous stakeholder consultations to assess how institutions are responding to the challenging new environment created by COVID-19 and to provide students with a fair opportunity to success. This summit provides the perfect platform to kick off this consultation and has laid the basis for future engagements. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the greatest lessons from our experience through this pandemic is that online learning is here to stay. With the fourth and fifth industrial revolution, the world has moved on, and it is time for us to catch up. And I believe with the catching up that we have to do, we will not be bogged down in the catching up. We will be innovative, creative, and make sure that we leapfrog and catch up with the rest of the world. The onus now lies on all stakeholders in the sector to embrace online learning and leverage the many opportunities it presents. It will require a paradigm shift from how we used to think about teaching and learning. But this is the new normal, and if we would like to keep up with the rest of the world, we must work together to transform the sector. We cannot succeed at this in isolation, in silos. There must be collaborative work at all levels to ensure that we succeed together. Together we can become the change makers. With continued dialogue and cooperation, we have the power to build a truly resilient education system for our country, one that is better prepared to manage similar crises in future. Yes, indeed, COVID-19 is and has been a challenge, but it is a challenge that we must, which must help us to unleash solutions, possible solutions to current problems and future problems. It is only for us to work hard and really engage others within the sector, in the country, and externally to perfect our processes. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all the participants in this summit, keynote speakers, representatives of various institutions, students, and everyone following the proceedings online for making the time to be part of this important discussion. Thank you, UNESCO, for the continuous support and contribution to higher education training in Namibia. Lastly, I would like to express my gratitude to the NQA. Thank you for the initiative of creating a platform for dialogue between stakeholders to address the challenges faced within the sector. My hope is that this will not end up to be just another summit or workshop for the history books. As you share experiences and best practices, I encourage you to focus on cultivating tangible solutions and strategies that empower the sector to rise to the challenges presented, but to also illustrate our collective aspirations for the future and quality of education in our country. I wish you a successful summit, and I'm particularly looking forward to the insights, to be shared by the keynote speakers and the fruitful deliberations that will follow thereafter. On that note, by the powers vested in me, I am now declaring the NQA Virtual Summit on e-learning and quality assurance officially open, and I thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Dr. Itah Kandjii-Murangi, for that inspiring message, reaffirming that as a nation, we are a force to be reckoned with if we stand together, and indeed together we can. Thank you so much for that inspiring message. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to our first keynote address, and I would like to share with you briefly our speaker, who our speaker is. Carolyn Medal-Ananovo is the head of the education unit of the UNESCO Regional Office for Southern Africa since January 2015. The office covers 9 countries, including Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, South Africa, Zambia, and Zimbabwe. Prior to her assignment in Southern Africa, she was the Deputy Director at the UNESCO Institute for Lifelong Learning in Hamburg, Germany. During her 22 years stint at the Institute, she worked on areas of gender, youth and skills development, literacy, and non-formal education, HIV preventive education in non-formal settings, and citizenship education. Before joining UNESCO in 1993, Ms. Carol Medal-Ananovo was assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, teaching sociology and other social science subjects. She was also involved in a wide range of researches commissioned by the World Bank, UNIFEM, UNICEF, and ILO in the areas of urban poor women, child labor, international migration, and youth studies. Simultaneous to her work at the university and undertaking research, she was also the director of the Center for Women's Resource, a nationwide NGO involved in training and research on women's issues. And this is where she honed her popular education and training skills. To reduce the impact of closures, schools, colleges, and universities in Namibia, like the rest of the world, have been exploring alternative ways to continue with provision of education. One of these ways is e-learning. But what is e-learning, and what are the impacts, challenges, and opportunities? What does that impose on provision of education in the African and global perspective in the context of COVID-19? What effects does it have on the quality of education services provided during the COVID-19 pandemic? It now gives me great pleasure to welcome from Zimbabwe, Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananovo, UNESCO Education Specialist, to address us on e-learning experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic and African perspective. Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananovo, welcome, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning to the Minister and to the NQA officials, all protocols observed. Actually, I am not in Zimbabwe. I am on mission in Malawi, which makes it more difficult as I have a 1-week hectic schedule and I am not having the optimum technology. So I hope you're able to hear me. And so that's why I ask the host to please share my screen to share the presentation instead of me doing this. And are you able to share the presentation? I just wanted to say that what I would be presenting is about evidence. As the minister was saying, we need evidence badly about COVID-19's impact on education. We now know that COVID-19 has impacted on the health especially, but the economy, and of course in terms of learning. So I will not be dwelling on that, but instead we'll go directly to COVID-19 and e-learning. Next slide, please. Are you sharing my presentation? Good. Next slide. Next slide, please. So I start by saying what is e-learning? And I think by now we just need to have a shared understanding that e-learning is formalized teaching with the help of electronic resources, and it can be in or out. And COVID-19 has shown the experiences of e-learning outside the school, the educational establishment setup. Next slide, please. And what I will try to do is to share different studies and data on the situation on e-learning. And let me start with a global survey on deploying effective remote learning strategies. More than 100 countries participated in this survey organized by UNESCO, UNICEF, and the World Bank. Next slide. And what we can see, for example, in this slide, is to understand the differences in responses according to income. Now, while all countries offered something to mitigate learning loss during school closures, almost 90% were working on online platforms or television. But you can see in terms of the differences of the countries, the blue is, of course, the online platform, which is related to the e-learning. And you can see that high-income countries used online platform 95%, while for low-income countries, it's 64%. So you could immediately see the difference among countries in terms of their use of e-learning. And I also would like to refer that only 56% reported considerations for students with disabilities. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we can see that aside from the differences in terms of high income or low income, you can see that because they used it, high-income countries focus on expansion of online learning, and in many low-income countries where there was not so much focus on infrastructure on online, they focused their attention to radio and television. Next slide, please. And here, and you can see, this is a slide which talks about the perceived effectiveness of remote learning. And the orange is the one which is fairly effective, and black is very effective. And you can see not effective in blue. You can still see that in terms of effectivity, if we just focus on online, because that's what we're talking when we say e-learning, you can see even the differences among countries in terms of effectivity of online. And so we realized that, in fact, online has very mixed reviews, whether in terms of effectivity between low and high income countries. Next slide, please. You will have this slide, so I suppose you can look through them later. And what does it mean going forward? So, of course, we now know, and that's why this summit, remote learning has changed the education landscape, even as we have been talking about ICT for the last 2 decades. COVID-19 has really put to the forefront the importance of ICT and remote learning. And while it has expedited opportunities, and many countries use this an opportunity to improve their systems. It has also exacerbated disadvantages and will likely widen gaps. So we've seen differences in terms of incomes, in terms of how they have used different kinds of remote learning. Next slide, please. Now, what I presented before was the global survey done by different organizations. And the following surveys, researches, results are the ones that UNESCO have done with the SADC Secretariat, because we believe that evidence is very important. And the first two surveys are based on responses of the member states. So the first survey is the national responses on COVID in the education authorities. Next slide, please. Next slide. And what do we see? Of course, we have seen, and as we now also see, COVID-19 has differently impacted on our countries, even in the SADC region. I am now in Malawi, and I'm so impressed that people are not wearing masks when I was traveling for 5 hours, and their mask is not as strictly implemented as in Zimbabwe, where if you are not having mask, you can be arrested even when you're driving. So I suppose in Namibia, there are different protocols. So we can see the differences, and it has also impacted on the policies vis-a-vis opening of schools and how remote learning can still be undertaken. Next slide, please. Next slide. So what do we see in terms of members' response? Because like the first global survey, these are governments responding to these surveys. And you can see 100% of the governments said they have developed and used online materials as a measure for continuing the learning experience. Some have developed alternative offline, 92%. And you can see that a certain percent training of teachers, less than 10%. And that's food for thought, and I'll get back to that later. Next slide, please. And here we can see another divergence. The types of instructional resources used depend on the profile of learners. Radio education and educational television were mostly done for primary and secondary students, while university and TVET students used more online resources. Next slide, please. Here you can see in terms of, and I'm putting this up because at the end I would like to underscore the importance of exclusion in these times. And we can see in terms of measures to disadvantage students, these are the types of measures that were given to disadvantaged students for them to continue learning. So 77% had offline and printed materials. And you can see 15% in terms of free internet access. Next slide, please. And this is very important because e-learning cannot take place without the support of teachers. And we can see the different kinds of support. And later in another study, I will still go back to this. There was support for online distance learning platforms through Zoom. And then there were also online educational resources to help the teachers, and Namibia is one good example, as well as providing infrastructure and technical IT support to the teachers, because we're not only thinking of the students with devices, but how are the teachers equipped with the appropriate devices? Next slide, please. So in this study, the challenge that was raised from member states, and this I think is an important area in terms of implications for quality assurance, how do we continue assessment of learning? What kind of assessments are necessary? And of course, we often forget that quality is affected by the well-being of students. So how is this being addressed? And of course, because of online responses, how do we address early and young learners who are not yet as well versed as the older generation of students? Next slide, please. So we can see, and I don't need to emphasize that these are the implementation challenges across member states, and all of these have implications for online e-learning. No, of course, there's very underdeveloped technological infrastructure. One should say maybe it's very uneven. Even within a country, you can have some cities or some institutions in a city with high infrastructure, and those even within the city with a very low level of infrastructure. And correspondingly, the staff of this infrastructure, of these educational establishments, is a very important area. Next slide, please.
Miss Carolyn, my
Yes.
apologies to interrupt. There is a request for you to kindly adjust the volume of your microphone. Please
Is
increase
it
or
soft?
use your headphones. If you can
I
just
am already, it's already full
it's already full.
volume. Yeah, I think
Your
that's my
headphones,
challenge because I am, and so unfortunately I did not carry my headphone.
that's fine.
That's
You may
fine. You may
proceed. Thank
proceed.
you.
Thank you. So this is now in terms of the why we talk about challenges, in terms of the silver lining. What has emerged? Of course, we now see, because especially officials and managers of institutions realize the importance of online learning. There's a rapid advance in this. There's more attention that is being used for technology as a learning tool. There are e-learning policies in educational institutions. And of course, like I've heard from UNAM, importance and upgrading of internet broad-based access for learners and educators. Next slide, please. So in this study, which was done in June and July, we identified best practices in terms of member states' use of, in terms of member states' responses to COVID-19. So many of the states worked with national TV channels to ensure continuity of learning. Namibia is one of those countries who provided immediately a platform for online and learning. It's not automatic. And some learners and lecturers and teachers were conducting virtual classrooms. And I think Namibia was one of these. And one could see that those who were able to immediately go into this direction were there, those who had existing platforms already. So it was not as difficult to shift immediately compared to many other countries who did not have such existing infrastructure. And in many countries, and these are examples in Namibia, which were presented in the SADC meeting, there was a development of using their own online platform. Next slide, please. Okay, you will be hearing some noise because there's going to be vehicles. The second study is a study done on open and distance learning, also with the SADC Secretariat. And here you can see the policy environment. And here you can see that even if SADC has a policy, a regional policy since 2012, only 5 countries do have their own ODL policies. And if you look closely and reflect on these 5 countries and how they have responded to COVID-19, you can see that these countries are also the most advanced. So indeed, having an ODL policy is very important for e-learning. Next slide, please. And we also, as this is a conference that aims to look at quality assurance, and we've seen that, of course, the SADC ODL policy framework has a clear provision on quality assurance. Next slide, please. And you see that, I think in the previous slide, it was shown that while there is provision for quality assurance, it is not online for in terms of looking at the framework. And that's one big discussion point. How do we make sure that in the quality assurance framework, there are also possibilities for online? Here, I just want to show again the unevenness in terms of infrastructure, as e-learning is premised on a sound, stable infrastructure. You can see again the differences. For example, just in terms of mobile subscriptions per 100 people, South Africa has 159, Namibia has 130, but you have countries like Angola and Mozambique with less than 50. In terms of internet users, you've seen South Africa has 55, Namibia has 53, but you have countries like Angola as 21. So you can see also, again, the disparity vis-a-vis ODL infrastructure. Next slide, please. So we see that, of course, since basic infrastructure is important for e-learning, how do we deal with this given that it contributes to the digital divide? Next slide, please. And this is what I was saying, that in fact, in terms of quality assurance frameworks, they're designed for face-to-face. None of the 16 member states nor institutions have dedicated standards for online learning. And of course, Namibia is a very good example, except for some initiatives in Namibia. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, e-learning needs support of teachers, and the challenge not only in the SADC but in sub-Saharan Africa is that in fact you have 64% of primary and 50% of secondary who have received minimum training, and therefore they have not really the basic ICT skills, the basic digital skills. And so ministries have to contend with this poor capacity on ICT skills among teachers. Next slide, please. And you can see here the range of challenges, which is similar to the survey we did on national education responses to COVID-19, and very related to e-learning is limited access to connected digital devices, limited broadband infrastructure, limited locally relevant open resources, lack of teacher preparedness. So we see these recurring messages in the different studies. Next slide, please. And again, when we have challenges, we've seen how the member states have been responding to this, have become so, we've seen examples of resilience. The COVID-19 became a catalyst of adoption of ICT strategies. Mobile devices have been used. And there have been partnerships, and I think this is very important, partnerships with private sector, with telephone companies have been now like a good model. Before they were just in theory talking about public-private partnerships, but now we have examples that this is necessary and this works. Next slide, please. And this is just a case study of Malawi. And as if you remember, Malawi is one of those with a policy, and how because of policies, you give a environment, a frame for programs. And the Malawi College of Distance Education is a very good example of what can work for online or ODL. Next slide, please. And here, in terms of the recommendations of this SADC survey, which focus on ODL, what's important is capacity building of national stakeholders and improving digital access and digital integration on ODL. And more important, and now we need to understand, and this summit is timely, how do we measure, how do we report and monitor on all these areas of work, which are fairly new and which are upcoming. Next slide, please. Now, the next study, this is the third study. The two first studies which I mentioned are SADC surveys. The respondents were the member states. And this time, the third study that I am briefly presenting is a study that we did with 10 universities, UNAM included. And I'm so happy that UNAM took the lead. Dean Charmaine took the lead to have this study on teachers' readiness, on remote teaching. We had almost 100 researchers, young researchers from 10 SADC universities to participate on this. And these are the findings on the research challenge. We had 6 topics on teacher readiness. And so one important thing is how to rethink and reimagine education systems as they were disrupted because of COVID. And in fact, there's a specific term, emergency remote teaching, that immediately our teachers jumped into. Next slide, please. And these are the findings of this study, and the research. This report is available, and I can share this definitely. Charmaine has this. So first of all, it's a huge learning curve for the teachers. Quality, emergency, remote training was hampered by limited access to electricity, coupled by insufficient training of how to support students and learning. But despite this, we can really give accolades to our teachers. Despite these limitations of infrastructure and insufficient training, many teachers jumped in and participated in all kinds of ERT, and I know you are witness to this. Next slide, please. And again, the same messages. There is unequal access to quality education and relevant for e-learning, limited training of the teachers, limited access to IT infrastructure, limited interaction between teachers and learners. And I think learning, we need to rethink and reflect on e-learning. Can it all the time be virtual? What does it mean for the teachers and learners? We know that learning is a part of social construction. And what happens when there is no physical interaction? And of course, the question of quality and integrity of academic programs. Next slide, please. Again, here are the positive things from this study done with involving university researchers. Teaching and learning continued. Staff, we can commend the staffs and students for exploring, engaging in all forms of learner. There was acquired IT equipment as a way to immediately respond. Online learning materials became available. As I mentioned, there were more partnerships. Next slide, please. And this last slide on a study is the third research topic that we engaged with in the SADC-wide research. And this was about the youth and the exclusion of youth during COVID-19. And these are the results, some of the results. So first of all, the lack of access to all e-learning infrastructure. E-learning has become exclusively expensive. Lack of learning apps, youth excluding from accessing the library, and knowledge and capacities, lack of knowledge on how to use internet and new technologies. And we are talking to excluded youth about this, and difficulty in learning without teachers' explanations. Young people who are used to face and do not have the skills yet to transit to virtual learning. Next slide, please. So as my last slide, as a way of summarizing the 31 slides, the two main messages is one, we have heard of the digital divide so often before COVID, but now digital disparity is facing us straight to the face. We have all kinds of digital disparities among countries, high, low. We have within countries, rural, urban. We have within countries, higher education has more access to than TVET. We have, as we heard, young students, the younger students, primary and secondary, are not yet as well acquainted with digital learning. So we see all kinds of digital disparities. We are seeing this. Before, perhaps it was more conceptual. Now we are seeing this. And in terms of population, we can see, that's why I focused about the people with disabilities. How are we dealing with them? Because we assume that they cannot read or they cannot see, they cannot hear. What special measures are we providing? So I think the second message, the main message I wanted to give is, how do we make sure that we are addressing these different levels of disparities? ICT disparity, training disparity, access to different resources, maybe because of language, many of the materials might be in a certain language. So I think the second message I would like to relate to you is to make sure that quality assurance, hand in hand with quality assurance, is the addressing of issues of exclusion. So disparities and exclusion, these are the two key messages that I would like to leave with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananovo, for that introspective presentation on e-learning, its impacts, challenges and opportunities that it imposes on provision of education in the African and the global perspective. That, of course, was the UNESCO education specialist, Ms. Carolyn Medal-Ananovo, sharing with us e-learning experiences during the COVID-19 pandemic and African perspective. We are aware of the audio challenges and are attending to it. We sincerely apologize to our online viewers for this inconvenience. And again, we thank you so much for joining us during this virtual summit by the NQA. It now gives me great pleasure to move on to our next keynote address. And please allow me to also introduce you by giving a short profile on our speaker. Dr. Maggie Bekus-Amis is a senior lecturer within the University of Namibia with close to 19 years of teaching or academic and research experience within the Department of Information and Communication Studies in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, where she fulfilled various roles since 1995. For the past 6 years, since 2015, she has been the director of the Centre for Open, Distance and E-Learning at the University of Namibia. She holds a PhD in Computer Integrated Education from the University of Pretoria, South Africa, and other technical qualifications in the field of ICT and e-learning. She oversees the entire strategic vision and activities in the centre and plays an active role with her various management team members and staff in the implementation of e-learning policies, strategies, platforms, tools, amongst others. Dr. Maggie Bekus is extremely passionate about e-learning capacity building activities, related research, and serves as a reviewer of various conferences in the field of e-learning. She's been involved in e-learning capacity building activities, ICT and e-learning policy and strategy development in Namibia and various countries in Africa and internationally on behalf of the Ministry of Education, UNAM, NOLNET, GIZ, to mention a few. She received various awards over the years, but worth noting is the GIZ Ambassador for Quality in Digital Learning in April 2016. She also made several contributions to the broader Namibian society in various roles as chairperson of boards within the telecommunication industry. The use of technology at all levels of education has been a call for decades worldwide. In this regard, some countries have reached commendable levels, while some are yet to realize this vision. However, during the COVID-19 global crisis, there has been an incredible amount of large-scale efforts to use technology in support of remote teaching and learning. What have been the best practices in Namibia, in the Namibian educational institutions at all levels with regards to the use of technology in teaching and learning during COVID-19, and how effective institutions can implement the use of technology in teaching and learning? To address us on these questions and e-learning strategies, experiences and lessons learned during COVID-19, a Namibian perspective, please welcome e-learning specialist Dr. Maggie Bekus.
Thank you for that. Honourable Minister, Program Director, and the entire audience in front of me here, locally within the venue of the National Qualifications Authority, as well as our broader online audience, a hearty good morning to all of you. It is indeed a great pleasure to speak after a very renowned speaker, such as Carolyn, that brought an African and bigger regional experience of e-learning and how we used and managed things online during COVID-19. And with that said and done, that brings me now to the local perspective of what we did as a country in terms of, as the Commonwealth of Learning would say, to keep learning open during COVID-19. So it's with that in mind that I'm bringing a local Namibian institution contextual experience to this platform today under the bigger umbrella of the dimensions of quality assurance in education, touching on those and what we managed to do as the University of Namibia in that regard. So I'm not going to bore you, but I hope you can see my presentation. In that, I will take you a little bit through the context of e-learning at the University of Namibia, the operations of e-learning within the center that I'm heading at the University of Namibia that is called the Center for Open Distance and E-Learning, a little bit of bits and pieces about and tips and tricks about online and blended learning and bringing this a little bit home to our local context in Namibia. But most importantly, within all of this, none of us can ignore the fact that change had to be managed. So a bit of change management strategies, quality assurance enhancements, monitoring that took place during this time, and then to pause and ask, was e-learning a response to COVID-19 or not? I would juxtapose it a little bit in terms of its opportunities, but also its challenges, because I'm sure you all know that we actually could see both during this COVID-19 lockdown timeframe. Then also the e-learning strategies that we had to think about during this time as a university and as a nation with our line ministry and the basic education ministry, our National Council for Higher Education, all of them and NASFAF came to the party in this regard. And I'm very proud to say that we had the support in this country. I presented the same presentation last week to Carolyn and her team when UNESCO and SADC also asked me, why don't you share this with an audience outside Namibia as well? Because we equally would like to see what you were doing as a university and as a nation. And yes, so I could in the process bore others that listened to this already, but hopefully there'll be a tweak and a twist in terms of how I deliver it to you. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, the context of e-learning at the University of Namibia, could I ask that maybe the presentation is presented to the audience instead of my face on the cameras at the moment? Can we have a switch of the presentation on the various LED screens instead of my face? Thank you very much. There we go. So the context of e-learning at the University of Namibia is framed within this context, and I won't dwell a lot on that because you can see it for yourself, and the slides are also speaking for themselves. But we are framed as an open distance and e-learning center within the University of Namibia, and we are made up of 3 core departments, and these are all important for you to be able to understand what can make or break the success of e-learning, or for that matter, open distance and e-learning, because as of late, we would rather like to refer to it as ODL, because it's all about open distance and e-learning, how we infused technologies into the open distance learning sphere and space. Therefore, we have an ODL section, standalone within the directorate or the center. We have an e-learning dedicated center, and we have an administrative center within the center as well. So that's the context. Within this next slide, I'm bringing home to you how we are supporting the different modes of study through the various faculties within the University of Namibia. Of course, during COVID-19, full-time came on board as well. Was never the case. Other than, I should acknowledge, a couple of academics that wanted to try blended learning and consulted the center, and we trained them and we took them along. That helped a lot during COVID. That meant that they had a sort of a yardstick to continue from. So that's your blended part, but mostly your full-time student and lecturer had to come on board during COVID-19, more so for the first time. Part-time lecturers and students as well, because now we had no choice anymore. If we had to keep learning open, we had to make sure that we now embrace the entire community of the University of Namibia, as well as what was our mandate specifically before for distance and online learning. So a bit of statistics in this regard. We used to support roughly 6,000 distance and online students before, but during COVID-19, we actually opened up the entire university fraternity and now supports over 30,000 students collectively within the university, with roughly 1,500 academics as well along this. And then we support them across this faculty framework that you can see on this slide, whether it's the Faculty of Law, of Education, Humanities, Economic and Management Sciences, Health Sciences, our business school, the science faculty, engineering, all of them we managed to support in this regard. So that's just a bit of a teaser into the actual content that I'm now going to dive into. So as an e-learning strategy for ODL, I think I would like to break it down in terms of what e-learning strategy did we manage as an institution to use for open and distance learning? What e-learning strategy did we use for blended learning purposes? And what e-learning strategy did we use for e-learning? So that's what I'm going to take you through in a couple of slides before I come to change management and quality enhancement and improvement procedures that we equally had to deal with during this time. So we were established, as I said, as a merger between the then Center for External Studies and the Center for E-Learning and Interactive Multimedia, and became CODEL in 2016. And in so doing, it allowed us the opportunity as a one-year-old e-learning dedicated center in the University of Namibia to infuse technology in the print-based processes of the then Center for External Studies, referred to as open and distance learning. And this was a huge success factor within the university, but it wasn't easy at all. We started off with all processes and activities purely print-based. And it was our duty as a center and people with the know-how, so to speak, not boasting about myself, but we had to think outside the box and without the box in terms of making sure that technology can be infused and we can perhaps reach the unreachable through our digital footprint within the country. At that stage, only a manual footprint through our regional centers and campuses. So we infused the technology and we moved the print-based materials as per a Commonwealth of Learning Quality Assurance Guideline through which we developed them to digital and electronic materials, now available in PDF format as well for our students. And we moved handwritten and print-based assignments at that stage in 2015 through a pilot in 2016 across 3 or 4 programs, full-fledged online in 2017 across all the distance and online programs at that stage. And actually, that became part of the Commonwealth of Learning Good Practices Summary of the good practices of how technology can be infused in open and distance learning print-based methods. And that's what we managed, and they are still online as we speak today. So here's my strategy and the university strategy and the center strategy about e-learning. Selected programs in 2017 were then also identified by the university management, and we had to transition them from only distance mode to full-fledged and face-to-face to full-fledged online mode as well. So there you can see what we were used to as a university. Not that we are at all shy about that we used to stand in front of a large audience for 45 minutes trying to project and hoping that we have made an impact and that we have reached higher order level thinking skills of our students, which I'm a firm believer of we never did. Maybe the first 5 or 10 in front of us, but those at the back, as per that example there, always had to learn through rumor. Because if they couldn't hear you in front, they had to ask the colleague next door, what was it again? What did she say again? And this is, colleagues, one of the advantages that e-learning brought to us as an institution. Face-to-face will always be important because there are also quality regulations for that, and we have to adhere to them on a daily basis. But we are in an era where we have to acknowledge that, as the Honourable Minister said, e-learning is here to stay. So we have to work hard to embrace it and to make it a better world for each and every Namibian citizen in this regard. That grants us also the opportunity, because we moved these programs fully online with lots of resistance. But today, these are the people that are saying, thank God you convinced us then in 2017 to take the punch and move online. They are now online as we speak. They were online during COVID-19, and they are continuing to be online. That offered opportunities of personalized learning, that offered opportunities of moving away from mono-model materials to multi-model materials that we are able to release on a learning management system, of which I will also show you an example later on. So this means, ladies and gentlemen, from pure textbook-based resources, we managed to mix them all up, almost like the then expression of audiovisual materials, where we are able to have print, text, video, and audio, and much more together. You'll see a little bit later, but that's the opportunities that we got from moving those programs in 2017 online. Not yet very firm and solid in terms of infrastructure, maybe laptops even to the students, but I should also safely say we then already also started to negotiate with our operators in the countries and offered a very reduced 3G device, and up now at the moment 4G device to our students. And that opportunity has even further been solidified recently through our ministry, NCHE and NASFAF, of also making sure that those participants and institutions that never had these opportunities before or negotiated with the operators maybe themselves before now have the same equal opportunity to do so. So in terms of the strategy of e-learning that we infused into a blended environment, and here I hope terminology is not going to be, in terms of just wording that we are using technical jargon and not bringing it down to everybody to understand and to identify themselves in this way, but with a blend. We simply mean those opportunities that we were able to create between what's happening in a face-to-face classroom, what's happening online, and bring them together. And that's what we mean with a blend. There are several other ways in which you can blend learning opportunities, but this is a critical way of doing so. Not taking the lecturer fully away from the face-to-face classroom, nor bringing everything in terms of the online environment for the person and impose and force the person, but the best of both worlds, and that's what we call a blend. And in blended learning, the strategy that the University of Namibia used with the support of the Center for Open Distance and E-Learning was to embrace a flipped classroom concept from 2017 as well. What does it mean to bring a flipped classroom concept across in a institutional setting? It simply meant that we were now able to record our lecturers before the class in terms of the lecture that they had to avail to their students, and then avail this recording to the student in order to engage prior to the classroom so that rote learning and that blah, blah, blah in 45 minutes can be reduced. And the student can come prepared after having viewed the content to ask questions about the aspects he or she struggles with. And that was the beauty of a flipped classroom concept that as a center we embraced from 2017. So we promoted blended learning through showcasing and through training of the community. We also promoted lecture capture, that's self-recording, and as I said, flipping things around. Have the content beforehand, interact with it, go to class, and then punch holes into the content and establish where the knowledge is everywhere, as I believe, on this rectangle glowing in front of us daily and everywhere in the world. That knowledge is. It's what we do with it in terms of how we bring it across to our student population. So now I'm moving into the digital learning environment at the Center for Open Distance, and for that I mean the University of Namibia as a whole. So this digital learning environment comprises various tools that are performing different roles to support learning, whether this was prior to COVID-19, during COVID-19, and now in the new norm as well. This digital learning environment is what is keeping us alive as an institution and as a country. But what is important here is that we did not take a piecemeal or fragmented approach as a university. Even in designing the system, we took a holistic approach to ask ourselves, what tools do we need other than that just a learning management system platform, Moodle? What else do we need to bring that holistic experience, almost seamless for the candidate at the other end? Because it should be like that you don't confuse your learner or your lecturer, for that matter, with technology and how it operates in the background. To them, on the front end, it should be a seamless experience at all times. I believe the camera switched again to me and not to the presentation. I don't mind if that happens from time to time, but I do believe that the slides are carrying their own gist. So thank you for bringing us back. So here we go. I've explained the bigger digital learning environment, and now I'm bringing the role of the digital learning environment components and how we look at them holistically within the University of Namibia. At your bottom layer, you have your learning management system by the name of Moodle. It's an open source platform, free and available to all of us in this country and other countries as well, but it needs expertise to customize it and to bring it home for your local environment. And that is something that we focused on from the onset. Customizing Moodle to drive and bring it home to a local Namibian experience. I'm really happy to announce that recently I was also invited to present at the Moodle headquarters in Australia through their Moodle Mood virtual conference, and they were pleasantly surprised, I have to say, Honourable Minister, with how we have localized, customized, and sort of escalated Moodle to another level in the university. And it's by doing this. I'll give you a sneak peek of what we are doing daily in terms of that platform. Moodle is there, as you can see on my left, I'm assuming on your right, for course creation, enrollment, assessment, grades, whatever you want to call it and name it. And on this side, my right-hand side, I'm assuming your left-hand side, for learning facilitation, for pulling analytics. Colleagues, I'm so glad that we have systems through which we can pull reports. We live in an evidence-based world. It's no longer a matter of thumb sucking. No, if the Honourable Minister wants to know how many students are online as we speak, we should push that button and we should be able to avail the statistics to the Honourable Minister. From an informed position, decisions can then be made. So learning analytics in the era where we live right now, that's of utmost importance. For our quality assurance unit in UNAM by the name of SEQUAM, this is of critical importance, as well as our Center for Learning and Teaching, Continuous Professional Development, Learning and Teaching and Improvement, CPDTLI. We had to work as a team, as well as our computer center. We had to work as one to make things happen and possible during and before COVID-19, because all of what I'm presenting to you here is what we had in place prior to COVID-19. So if you look at the tools on top, we are using a tool also open source by the name of Mahara. That's an e-portfolio tool that encourages reflective learning and journaling of your learning experience. No employer is going to look at you anymore unless you bring a portfolio of evidence of what you learned and were exposed to with quality infused into it at a higher education institution. And Mahara is one of those platforms inside Moodle. It's not operating anywhere else. You don't need to go to a separate website or Google it. It's built as a third-party software into Moodle to allow you to not deviate while you're busy learning. So that's Mahara. In the middle, we have also integrated what we call, and I'm just mentioning 4 of them, there are loads of them, and there won't be time to go into all of them. But with the open ticketing system, this is again a tool that we've built, again open source, into Moodle, where students can express their challenges to us. And we have appointed help desk officers within the center that are just monitoring the tickets created by students and stakeholders alike in terms of their challenges. This OS ticketing system also built into Moodle for the comfort of our students, again, not to leave the learning platform and go elsewhere to report a problem or to look for a person, for that matter, that can actually indicate it here. And we pull statistics and reports from how tickets are closed, what the turnaround time is all about. But ladies and gentlemen, it's about quality that we are talking. And improving effectiveness and efficiency means that if a staff member didn't close this ticket within 24 hours or 48 hours, whatever the turnaround time, it escalates to the director and is asking me a question. Why is this student query not answered yet? That's the effectiveness and efficiency that technology can also bring alongside us. You know, in the era of the 4th Industrial Revolution and with artificial intelligence and robotics, we will still exist as human beings. But we have to ask ourselves the question, how will we exist? What creativity will we bring to the order of the day to coexist with the robots? And we will be able to, because they don't possess higher order level thinking skills, nor can they creatively resolve issues. It's us as the human being that can do so. So our tools and systems must do the same. It must help us. It shouldn't scare us. Then Panopto is the one in green. That's the one that we are actually using to record lectures. And on this one, I have to acknowledge the Cardiff University through the Phoenix Memorandum of Understanding with the University of Namibia. This platform is commercial and they pay 50% every year and the university 50%. But there is a reason for paying for Panopto as a video capturing software, because this is your leading video capturing software, because it allows even a quiz to be populated on the content of the video. It's no longer the video that we used to know before. Very static. You just sit there and you are forced to listen to the video for 30 minutes to 45 minutes. No. That's not the era we live in at the moment. The era we live in at the moment is asking us to research and bring across seamless technologies that can help us to pause, reflect, think, pause, reflect, continue. And even that video needs to be reduced to bite-sized learning, because that's all that you can take in by looking at the screen for a period of 15 to 30 minutes. I would actually like to have all our recorded videos by lecturers for students to actually embrace a 15-minute period. That's why a TED Talk almost takes the same amount of time, because you want to be impactful with what is there. But video is of that nature that you can now search the content if you missed out during class time or anywhere where it was discussed. You can now search it, you can even assess. And unless the student has actually passed the answers in terms of the previous content of the video, you can stop the learner from proceeding to the next part of the content before he or she mastered the previous part. So video has evolved, ladies and gentlemen. And now I come to our virtual live classroom setup, also built into Moodle, that all of you used, I'm sure, during COVID, which is Zoom, but commercialized again. The best equivalent to that, which is open source again, built into Moodle as we speak, is Big Blue Button. And that even assured that during COVID-19, when for the first time we had to take our 2 vacation schools normally taking place physically on campus, online, people were able to now facilitate the learning of our students by a click of a button inside Moodle and use Big Blue Button. In the same sense and way, we could use Zoom, whether it was for statutory meetings, whether it was, as has been the practice in Cordial for so many years, to facilitate the learning of postgraduate students in various master's degree programs happening solely through Zoom and reaching all of them from wherever they are. Now, in the past, our students even had to go to a physical campus of the university in order to participate in a lecture. Now, there was no longer a need when we started to introduce Zoom, because we pushed the link of the lecturer to them and they could access it from the closest hotspot or the closest village internet cafe or wherever they found themselves. But they could continue to learn. I will not go a lot more into this technicality, but I'm breaking them further down for you just so that you get a sneak peek. I'll not talk a lot of these ones anymore, but here's Moodle for you, and that's the overarching layer at the bottom that I talked about. That's our learning management system, and there's even a mobile app available for it, and we encourage our students to download the app and interact with us in that way if they are not having access to a laptop or other devices. So that's our learning management system as an e-learning solution. There's Panopto, just also to indicate to you what we use Panopto for in terms of recording lectures and availing it to students beforehand, flip the classroom, and then allow the students to actually question and challenge the content more. There's our Mahara, that's the e-portfolio platform that's used for reflective thinking and learning. But here I also need to bring out another use, because in one of the seminars, I got a question from the audience where they asked me, but hang on, Maggie, why are you not using the e-portfolio already built into Moodle? And I said, yes, this is the difference. We have to research and we have to find out what can bring the best experience to our students. And for as long as it's integratable within your overarching learning management system to form part of your digital learning environment, why not bring the best to the end and to the world of the lecturer and the student? And that's the idea with Mahara that we use. Here comes Zoom and Big Blue Button. I've already explained them and the purposes for which we've used them, keeping learning open in a synchronous way. This is now where you and your student must be online at the same time, if possible for them. But don't forget the powerful tools inside Moodle where you don't have to be online all the time, that we, in a technical jargon way, refer to synchronous as well as asynchronous interaction with the students, where you can be at home and later on get back to the platform and interact. That's your asynchronous part of communication. But here we go. We also use what you and maybe most of the audience listening online here today to me and Carolyn are also familiar with a plagiarism detection software called Turnitin, Well, at the University of Namibia, we use the Scandinavian equivalent, and it's called Urkund. And it's doing exactly the same that multi-billion-dollar Turnitin will cost for you and institutions embracing those. We are on the end of going more open source where we can. Reduce on cost and save money where we can. Now, Urkund is also paid for, but at a much lower rate in comparison to what Turnitin would have scoped and quoted us as well. And this is the beauty of Urkund, also built inside Moodle. So for every assignment that the full-time distance or online student will submit, it's first scanned, the overlaps detected, and a report is generated. This report is pushed to the lecturer, and the lecturer also has, the prerogative to decide to click a button and push it to the student as well. It should be pushed to the student because you need to learn from your mistakes. You need to see where you've gone wrong. Plagiarism should not be used as a tool to actually scare our students away. No, not at all. It should be used to enhance and improve quality. This is about quality we are talking about. And if quality is to be enforced in that way, then we have to enforce it. And that is what we are doing at the university. And so for master's and PhD dissertations and theses as well, we scan them through this platform as well, and we avail the overlap percentage reports. Here I am, COVID and change management. Knowing or unknowingly is what I would like to say. I think we didn't even know what change management strategy we embraced as a university and as a country. Up until a point in time, we sat still and reflected and researched and asked, maybe we have used the IPIM change management strategy without even realizing, because COVID came sudden. Change was radical. Things were disrupted, and we had to think as a university, how will we deal with this without losing out on quality in the process? So we followed the simple IPIM approach, and with time indication, I'm going to shift to actually what the IPIM change management strategy allowed us to do. There you can see it. We could identify, what needed to be changed during this time, our approaches that needed to be changed. We needed to plan, prepare, think outside the box, come up with strategies. It was all about, as the previous speaker also referred to, it was more emergency remote teaching. ERT, then full-fledged online learning, because we had to embrace what we had available to us. So the ERT is also reflected in terms of how we implemented and how we supported our lecturers and students. And then we continuously had to monitor, adjust, and provide feedback from a quality perspective. Then change management inside e-learning is also what helped us a lot. What could we do in the process? We had to come up with a website for UNAM's response to COVID and move things digital so that all our stakeholders, students inclusive, as our most important client, had access to their learning resources. We had to come up with training resources, mostly online and in digital format, and we came up with simple courses that we called Moodle 101, Panopto 101, in order to take our community slowly but surely through this process in order to be able to cope with COVID and e-learning, and embraced various support structures. And here we go, ladies and gentlemen, it's the key. The advantage of the Center for Open Distance and E-Learning in UNAM is that with the help of the Commonwealth of Learning, a couple of years back, I think 2016, 2017, we managed to develop quality assurance guidelines for each and every process in that center. Whether it was online teaching or online facilitation, whether it was print materials or online materials creation, every single process within the institution now has got a quality assurance guideline. That also helped us to come up with improvement plans through our Center for Quality Assurance. And e-learning, there is no difference there. It's how you take the approach to embrace quality. My question always to an audience is, did we actually manage to uphold quality when we were only blah-blah-blahing for 45 minutes in a class? And if we managed to uphold that quality, how did we do it? Do we have evidence of that? But here, in an online environment, certainly so, Honourable Minister, if you asked us how did we manage to uphold and to adhere and enhance quality online and for e-learning, that is indeed what we managed. We even supported SECOM, our Center for Continuous Professional Development, Teaching, Learning and Improvement, and the entire university in terms of learning analytics. A click of a button inside Moodle and you could see who were the performers in a class, who were the non-performers in a class, who submitted an assignment, who did not submit an assignment, who participated in a test, who did not manage to do so, and then opportunities by the click of a button to mail all those students simultaneously from the click of the graph angle X, whether X or Y X, and communicate to all those students, whether it's to motivate those that manage to do it, or it's further encourage them, or it's even to find out what stopped the others from doing so. But technology allowed us to do those things. And we could hear it from the horse's mouth. So I said e-learning also became a response to COVID because it was a global and is a global reality, and it is part of our new norm at the moment. And even here, we had to do a lot. But what's important on this slide is just the message that we actually had, a blueprint of being an open and distance and e-learning center since 2016, and that helped us to infuse all these technologies into our full-time programs, courses, and students' engagement as well. I'm not going into detail, but we came up with a digitalization strategy. It was the first thing we had to think about as a university was, what is it that we are going to use to guide each and every stakeholder in this regard? And you can follow the steps of what actually formed part of our digitalization strategy. Quality is always there, and the whole process of monitoring, evaluation, and feedback. So I'm not going to go into more details. This is just a slide showing to you how by the 17th of March, when we were called in and COVID hit our country and lockdown and national lockdown measures were shared with us, and we had to embrace them and adhere to them, the university came up with its website in terms of another page that indicated UNAM's response to COVID-19. And you know how this really helped us. It helped us to take every single learning resource, how-to manual, guide, and even training to this website. We were able to push everything there, inclusive of best practice e-learning, learning strategies, and best practice online pedagogies. Because for some, it was first that they engaged with these, and we had to think out of the box. We even managed to create an e-learning alias through which we could have structured communication about how we moved people online during COVID-19. This slide is basically just showing you that e-learning couldn't solve all problems of the day. And I wouldn't stand here and say that we haven't had severe challenges in the process as well. But we managed to also call face-to-face interventions where we could readdress those aspects that we could have failed. And I remember at some point I gave the Honourable Minister feedback that I believe 25 to 30% is without our reach at this point in time. We even administered an USSD SMS to our students to find out, where are you? And what are you doing? And what do you have access to? And based on that, we managed to say that 30% that we could have missed through the online initiative, we need them back on campus. I need to make sure they get the same quality learning experience as the one that maybe got it online. So that's what we did. I'm ending, ladies and gentlemen, with my challenges and lessons learned and the way forward as part of the presentation. I'm sorry if I've stayed too long on some of the slides, but just a couple of challenges, because otherwise you might get the impression that she sits here and she talks of e-learning as if it is the alpha and the omega. It certainly isn't. I'll never sit here and deny what we went through and the challenges we faced as a country and as a university, but there it is. Perception, mindset. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to have a better Namibia, we have to work on the mindset of all of us. We have to make sure that we will change along with the change. There came COVID and disrupted all of us and forced us to change. Why did we need COVID to basically make an impact on the bigger community and society to embrace e-learning? Why was it COVID? Why did we need to wait for a crisis fix in order to fix what we could have fixed before? There was no need to do it, but we did it. And that is a challenge. It's still a challenge as we speak. We had to progress with the implementation of our digital strategy, implementation strategy, but it was more ad hoc than anything else. Full embracement, there was no time for it. COVID was here and we had to move and we were on the run. Infrastructure, availability and responsiveness. Here, this slide, in terms of the fact that we had to seek support from our stakeholders, we can never forget. Honourable Minister, that beautiful new service arrived. And I can tell you online exams are going on at the University of hiccups by the day, but they are there. And we are going to embrace them. And we are going to thank this nation because it's there, the taxpayers' money that basically helped all the institutions to survive and can continue to survive. It's them that enabled us through you and our other stakeholders as they are seated here today to be able to embrace e-learning. I can never forget to say we have to thank you most sincerely from the bottom of our hearts because struggle times we had. We operated from 2016, the entire COVID-19 period on second-hand servers. But we had to make do. We had to monitor them daily and see if they were falling off, and we had to pick things up again, delete things, remove things, put them back again. But we had to keep learning open. Now that process at least is going to reduce on the pressure of monitoring a server daily because this enabled us the support from government. Capacity and expertise of staff, digital fluency in this country and everywhere remains a problem. Honourable Minister, bring us together and help us to collectively train and capacitate in digital fluency. If this is the future that we all see in a fourth and fifth industrial revolution, then bring us together and let us do it not in silos, but together. Digital fluency is a skill that we do not have in this country. It is at its lowest, and we have to collectively embrace and make sure that digital fluency of this country's citizens can improve. That was a challenge, and it remains one. Technical capacity. Why do we have to rely on one or two people with the know-how? Why can't people not be trained so that we have more and more people in a pool of technical expertise? It shouldn't only be the selected few with the current know-how. No. There are bright people and citizens of this country, students alike, that should make sure that we get a pool of technical experts, and we should just be reaching out to all of them on a daily basis. Right now, we pray day and night for health, for morale, for energy of the selected few that are able to do it. We need more. Working hours became almost impossible. We couldn't think of going to bed. Yes, we could work remotely from the comfort of our homes, but we were online all the time. That was a challenge because there are so few that could help and could assist. So these people, they must be more added to the pool, whether we like it or not. Innovative coping mechanisms had to be embraced and used by all of us. Then the lessons that we have learned, and I'm ending, Roche, I'm sorry, but I have to share the lessons that we have learned as a university. And I think in the process, your aircon also got warmer rather than colder. I don't know if the room people think, or the ones controlling the aircon, that, age is also honourable becoming I'm very young, but there are certain other things that are also playing a role. With that said, on a lighter note, let me continue. And please bring the slides back, housekeeping, so that it's not in focus on me, but on the lessons that we've learned. Planning remains key. You cannot do anything by moving through emergency remote teaching or e-learning, whatever you want to call it, without planning properly. We have to plan, plan, and plan. We cannot do so without strategies and policies. I'm pleased to say that in the University of Namibia, we recently got our open distance and e-learning and open educational resources policies approved up to Senate level. We worked hard on them, but we need them to survive as a university. We had to formulate also practical guidelines for implementation, at the level of our academics and students, and these remain vital. And here, I'm coming back to the overarching theme of this conference. We had to think of quality assurance guidelines for online practices. We had to think of reliability guidelines in terms of avoiding online cheating. If you wanted to bestow trust in a physical exam or test, which you no longer should, because on the first day of sit-in exams of the University of Namibia, what did our creative and innovative students do? Write the notes inside the mask and went in. So don't tell me cheating is only happening online. No and no and no. Cheating is happening everywhere, but your quality process is what you need to infuse to avoid cheating. And for that matter, we managed to bring in what we call either safe browser or randomized questions or things like that in order to limit cheating online. But cheating will be there. It's like a virus. One of my colleagues at the University of Namibia always says, Maggie, cheating is like a virus. The more you come up with solutions online to avoid cheating, the more our innovative and creative society will come up to hack that solution. So we have to stay vigilant at all times. We have to train at all times. The Honourable Minister referred to it as well. Support is critical to everybody, not just to people in the University of Namibia, staff or students alike, but every citizen in this country. Buy-in from government and senior management of the University of Namibia. Without that, this would have been a complete disaster. Buy-in and understanding at the top structural layers, that's critical. Stakeholder support. We can't do this alone. We need one another. Agility in terms of what this world brings to us. A 21st century environment is agility. Open-mindedness, flexibility, embracing change. Because as UNAM's slogan says, change is the only constant. So let's embrace it daily and move along with change. And anticipation. Never wait for a crisis to hit you in order to learn quickly as you move along, but don't use it as a crisis fix. The way forward as we are in the new norm, just one or two ideas from me, is that we need to now prepare very vigilantly for the new norm. It's here and it's here to stay, as the Honourable Minister said. We need to revise our approaches, and in the University of Namibia, we are going through a quality-enhanced process of program viability, and it's not a review, Mr. Gertze, it's a transformation. Because what we offered before and what is registered on your framework is what we have to take back now and ask ourselves, is it still relevant towards employability of our current product? And if it isn't, we can't review, we have to transform. Quality is important. Technology integration in everything we do is also critical. I just don't use it as an afterthought for a crisis fix. It was there all along. Let's embrace it, along with other important things like food and other things for survival, reducing poverty in our country. Let's embrace it in the same light. We need to revise structures and roles. We need to always focus on access, equity, and inclusion in everything we do and say. We have to map our risks daily, matrices to map risk, and actually at global and national level deal with this pandemic and everything else that will come our way. And ladies and gentlemen, I hope I didn't bore you in this presentation, but with this last slide, now it says, we would like to elevate UNAM's beacon of excellence by being a global partner to be reckoned with in e-learning. I express this on behalf of the Namibian society and all of us to make sure that we can become a beacon of excellence in e-learning and be a front runner and not be a follower, because that's not what we stand for as a nation. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. And over to you, Director of Ceremonies.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maggie Beker-Samis. Thank you very much for an enlightening and stimulating presentation. In fact, your delivery was so engaging that we almost lost track of time, as the topic was indeed timely, and you presented the material on these new innovations in a way that anyone and everyone could understand. Again, thank you so much for sharing with us your very, very valuable experience. Again, we thoroughly enjoyed your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, our online viewers, we now move on to our panel discussion. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce to you the Deputy Chairperson of the NQA Council and moderator of the panel discussion, Professor Anisha Peters, who will also now introduce the rest of the panelists to our viewers. Again, we invite our viewers to participate in this discussion by sharing your comments or questions in the comment section, and remember to use the hashtag NQA Virtual Summit 2020. Again, we also just want to remind our viewers that All presentations and speeches, including a full recording of the summit, will be uploaded on the various social platforms of the NQA, including the website, YouTube, as well as Facebook. I would now like to hand over to Professor Anisha Peters.
Thank you so much, Madam Director of Ceremonies, Honourable Minister. Thank you once again for gracing us. And allow me to stand on the protocol already established. So after that very engaging presentation, we can now delve into what were the problems that we experience and how do we move forward, and what are those dimensions of quality assurance within the education sector. And joining me for that is now the panelists whom I'd like to introduce. It will be Dr. Maggie Beekes-Amis, Ms. Caroline Medel Anunuvu. I hope she's still online. Mr. Kandjii-Murangi, representing the Association of Private Higher Education Institutions in Namibia. Ms. Eda Bon, the Deputy Executive Director, Formal Education, Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture. Mr. Lantla Lupachla, the Deputy Director, Innovation, Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation. And then we have Ms. Pamela Gertze, Student Representative. I don't think that she's related to Mr. Gertze because I saw him this morning going over to her and introducing himself. Nonetheless, so it's interesting. So she's our Student Representative. Welcome to all panelists. So starting now, one thing, we have only about 40 minutes for this panel discussion. Honourable Minister has a very important engagement at 12 o'clock. She would have loved to stay, but we are going to allow her to leave at about at a time just before 12. So just so that you know that she would have wanted to be here the whole time. Then we also have the questions that we are having is when COVID-19 hit and the universities were in recess and the schools were also in recess, and we thought that it was going to be something of short duration. And suddenly we were catapulted into this whole thing, this whole notion of how do we continue education? At the time, I can also remember, and this was going to be my first question, but I can't answer it because or have it answered, it's going to take too long, is the whole terminology thing, because we always had e-learning, as was explained. We always had virtual learning. We always had distance education. We had online learning as well. Suddenly, we were confronted with remote learning. And one thing that I would have wanted us to delve into is to distinguish between these various terminologies. And I know that Dr. Beekes-Amis and also Ms. Caroline had tried to define it. However, it's something that we need to bear in mind that they are not the same. They are really distinctly different. But bearing that in mind, what is it then? How do we then define the dimensions of quality assurance? Because that was the next thing. After everybody started getting online, suddenly we got to assessments. And suddenly we were saying, okay, where are our quality assurance manuals? How do we now transform whatever we have into the digital world? And starting with that, I'd like to start in a reverse order. So, Ms. Gertze, I'll start with you. What would you very briefly define as dimensions of quality assurance in education, bearing in mind the digital modes?
Thank you very much. Good morning, colleagues. Thank you very much for this opportunity. We had various talks on quality assurance, and Very pleased to represent my university, Namibia University of Science and Technology. And what I would then say was my major concern as a student is we only emphasize on quality assurance in terms of assessments, and we forgot about the quality assurance in terms of how the teaching and learning mode is delivered, since now we are forced or we moved into the digital world. So for me, I would then say that we need to redefine our quality assurance and work hand in hand from assessing the quality assurance in terms of the delivery mode of teaching and as well as the assessment mode, because now we see that there's variations in the mode of how students are being taught, students and learners are being taught, and in the way that they are assessed. Right now, we are facing problems such as students writing petitions on boycotting assessments being done face-to-face while their teaching modes were done online. So there is that variation between how I was taught and how I am being assessed. Yes, there is the fear of the quality in terms of assessing a student online rather than them having assessment face-to-face in terms of the cheating that was also spoke about by our previous speaker. But we should also keep in mind, and we should not neglect the fact that we need to monitor the way that we are being taught or students are being taught, or the way that the education is being delivered. Is there quality in that mode? And then we can ask ourselves, is there quality in the mode that you are being assessed in? So defining the quality assurance, I think then we, in short, we just need to go in assuring that the quality delivered in the way students are taught should also be in line with the way that how they are being assessed. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lupatla.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. From my perspective, representing the Ministry of Higher Education, Technology and Innovation, I would like to look at two dimensions. One, which is policy and planning, jointly with research and community services. We should not look at quality assurance as something that is only internal to this process, but it should also be something that should be external. I'm saying this with regards to some of the research, like Ngololo, I think as far back as 2012. Ngololo has already presented the possible challenges that we were going to face through lack of infrastructure, ICT infrastructure, especially in rural schools. The question is now, when we retrospectively look back, COVID-19 has given us a wake-up call. And we see some of these findings were already documented. What did we do about them? So an essential part of quality assurance is when we research, let's not research for qualifications and dump the research findings in the shelves somewhere. Let's find a way again. Cordell, you have given us a very good model of how you access issues and analytics. Let's go back and dig into this research that has been done. If we had acted on some of these findings, we would have definitely acted faster and averted some of these things. Maybe due to lack of time, I would have wanted to reflect on something else, but let me give my colleagues an opportunity. Yes.
Yes, thank you, and allow me also to stand on the protocol established in formal education, or let me say the school sector. We see the quality assurance comes with the setting of standards. And the ultimate standard that is in the Ministry of Education for formal education is, of course, the curriculum. Then the implementation process is supervised, monitored, evaluated through what we call the National Standards and Performance Indicators for schools in Namibia. And alongside with that, we also have the national standards for professional standards for teachers, which were embraced by the tertiary institution or the institutions of higher learning training teachers. So with these instruments, the quality assurance is managed in education. But as said by the colleague before, is that there is evidence on the ground, whether it's, measuring against the standards as well as the output from the formal education sector. We know measured against the targets in NDP 5, as well as our own targets of our own strategic plan, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture is still falling behind in delivering the required throughput and output at senior secondary. So as much as we have the frameworks, the policy frameworks and the structures in place, the implementation is often also a hurdle by itself. Now, in the context of COVID, yes, the school closure was aligned to the school calendar at the commencement of the declaration of the state of emergency. So we bought time through the 4-week, 6-week holiday that was declared at that time. And through that time, we reinforced the mechanisms of what we heard even being coined here, the remote learning. And the remote learning then being developed in a blended approach, where, of course, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, through partnerships with local print media, as well as the UN agencies, developed print material for the primary phase. For the junior secondary as well as the senior secondary, it was more or less left to the school's context themselves. It was not as much nationally managed, the process. And our surveys showed that the schools were really the professional hubs by themselves. In the senior secondary phase, many of them attempted to go online and capitalize on e-learning. But we also have to realize that this digital divide or the gap in terms of access to computers as well as the connectivity is very limited. We have hardly just a few more than 500 schools that are connected and that would, through schooling, benefit. So there is that discrepancy. And the evidence has also shown that it's the vast minority that has benefited from what we would here now talk about e-learning or the internet-based utilization to still facilitate the continuity of learning. So that's a snapshot from our side. But at the same time, as I started this conversation off with the standards, we did not meddle with the curriculum for the senior secondary. So in that line, we are committed to uphold the quality and to produce the results with our National Senior Secondary Certificate at ordinary level, the legacy as well as the revised curriculum as well as the higher level. So that is what I can say. In all other grades, we speak of a rationalized curriculum where we have condensed certain topics as well as much as we speak of the spiral approach that builds year after year on a foundation. We see changing here and there where the content and the age appropriateness would allow to rather deal with a particular content, finish it through continuous assessment and embark on the next content and minimize the repetition. Because if you do a strict analysis of our senior senior primary and junior secondary, there's an awful lot of repetition. So time can be bought indirectly, so to say, in focusing on critical competencies and skills and avoid a lot of repetition. Yes, repetition is required to reinforce knowledge and skills, but strike a balance between the repetition of the learning content and the fostering basic competencies and attainment thereof.
Mr. Murangi, what's the take of the private institutions?
Thank you very much, moderator, Dr. Professor Peters. First of all, I would like to congratulate you on your Google AI award. We are proud Namibians, and as I would always want to say, don't you ever underestimate the determined Namibian. They can do quite a lot of things, and that is exactly my experience with with COVID-19 during the period that we have to undertake, all of us, as private institutions. I must say, as an experienced ICT specialist, I could relate to almost everything that Dr. Biekes Ames was presenting. And I think back in 2008, Mrs. Kaperu, Mr. Herse, I walked into these very same NQA offices to try and create a framework in terms of quality assurance regarding e-learning. That was very, very early. And unfortunately, we did not have anything in place. How we are going to assess, how we are going to contain quality assurance and such things as such. But we are now there at that juncture that we should have put these things in place some time back, thanks to COVID. So when you want to talk from a private education institution, unfortunately, I might not be as optimistic as our public institutions, because we had to undergo a lot of challenges in terms of content development, in terms of infrastructure to ensure that you have everything running smoothly, in terms of capacity, where you had to also try and train some of your lecturers and tutors to be able to use the little infrastructures that were in place. So in terms of dimensions in quality assurance, we have been engaging with the ministry from the word go. We have been important stakeholders. There was a committee of quality assurance established through the NQA, and sometimes we just wish some things could have happened earlier or sooner to ensure that as Namibians we are rather proactive than reacting to some of these things. So the joy should come. As Doctor, I'm so fortunate that I was sitting next to you today. And I'm also very fortunate that the minister is here today, and we have really been engaging with the minister. As stakeholders in the education system, the private higher education institutions have suffered the most. So are the learners. So are the students. And collectively as Namibians, we can do better and engage them and support them, whether it's financially, whether through systems, or whether through training. This is where we are going. And I'm positive after this summit, in all our engagements, we are going to take a different route in terms of what we can do collectively as Namibians. That is my take.
Dr. For the online audience, the interruption that we had was that the Honourable Minister had to leave. So we just allowed a moment for her to leave the room. However, at this juncture, I also want to invite you, the online audience that is, to pose your questions on the platform that you are. We do have people who are actually monitoring the platforms for all of your questions. And they will pass those ones over to me as well. So just so that you are also sort of having an opportunity to ask questions. We ended with Mr. Murangi pointing out that how the private institutions have suffered, and he said suffered the most. And so we want to move on now to Dr. Biekes Ames. And I want to phrase it, we're now looking at the dimensions, right? And what I keep on hearing, or rather what the students said, is that, consider your dimensions all the time, throughout your delivery, and match your assessments with what you have done. Don't suddenly go and apply a different standard to it. So that's what I was hearing from her. I want to get to a little bit more of the normal dimensions of quality assurance that we apply within, especially in our higher education. If you could elaborate on those. And then I also want to know, are our students who are and learners graduating this year going to be known as the COVID learners and students? In other words, did we make special provision for them to pass and we just passed them? Because that is a fear that some of them are exhibiting. So, Dr. Beekes?
Thank you, Prof. Peters. And now I think my colleagues will come in on the last tough one, because certainly we cannot allow any stigma to our current students that manage to learn through COVID, that they be called the COVID student. And certainly will we not allow even our grade 12s when they exit this year, that they be known as the COVID learners. Not at all. But what is it that we are doing as institutions and as a nation to avoid that? And it's exactly through bringing in quality assurance practices and procedures into what we are doing. I think quality is a core keyword that we should eat, breathe, and sleep about. Because honestly speaking, what is it that we can do without analyzing ourselves and actually assessing ourselves? Because through doing so, we can learn through the challenges and improve as we go forward. And yes, we've made lots of mistakes. Mr. Gertze, I will not lie to you that maybe we've just had to jump on that boat and get the boat roving. But the point is, at some point in time, we had to ask exactly these questions to ourselves. That student representative is not wrong to say, why is there only emphasis on the assessment part of all of this and not emphasis on the quality of the learning and teaching process? And more so the teaching process, so that the learner can be guaranteed that it was quality infused. And it's with that in our university, we had to quickly reflect on how we moderated, even this process throughout. How are we going to ensure that we are compliant with global quality assurance standards? But I'm going to take the point of Mr. Murangi to Mr. Gertze. He knows we've served on community of practices for quality assurance in e-learning, but we now need it here. We now need it as a national quality assurance guideline for e-learning. And I know, Mr. Gertze, your colleagues have tried through the ministry and at the university. We are now serving, and I'm very grateful for that initiative that your colleagues came up with during COVID as well, and I'm certain your board, to come up with a committee for quality assurance in e-learning. I'm really grateful that I'm a member of that, and I think Murangi as well. We are all grateful that opportunity came our way as well, because these statistics that the Honourable Minister made reference to, these are the statistics that we need to punch holes in from a quality perspective. So quality should now become the order of the day, if it wasn't the order of the day. So I'm saying, Professor Peters, that student is so right. If you go now onto our platforms, she had a very good point in the beginning to say there are definitely differences between ODL, online learning or e-learning, or all of those different blended learning terminologies we want to use, and they are there for a reason. Those differences are there for a reason. And one of the things that we cannot claim is that during COVID, we had a perfect landing in terms of online learning and teaching. Leave assessment to the side, she addressed it. Everything became about assessment, and did we quality assure those? But did we quality assure the content that went onto our platforms? I can assure you not. Why not? Because it was an emergency. It was a crisis fix. We had to get content online. But what are we to do now as higher education and the schools set up secondary and basic education institutions? What are we supposed to do? We have to go back to the drawing board. We have to now, during the new norm, ensure that we go back and assure the quality of what was out there. I'm almost certain that our students had to make do with bullet points in a PowerPoint loaded onto an online platform. That's not how you actually assure and facilitate the learning of a student. I always advocate. It's like marking an online assignment of a distance student and not avail feedback. How would that student learn? A distance student and an online student's learning is only facilitated through proper and detailed feedback. It's through that feedback and quality infused in that process that he or she would be able to make it as well and compete with everybody else. So I'm saying, Mr. Gertz, let's bring those national quality guidelines for e-learning in place at a higher level. We have them at the university, but it's not enough. And even if we have them, the question would be, did we use them and embrace them? Did we make sure that our colleagues actually went in there and looked at the content and the activities and what we actually avail to our students? Yes, we can get away to say it was COVID. Why? We had to get things online. But now, there will no longer be an excuse. Online learning is about proper interactive content. It's not about a PowerPoint with bullet points with no explanation online. It's about properly created online content with online interactive activities. The students should learn and continuously learn. And yes, as I said, knowledge is not just in that content. Here, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. But the little we can do to bring the local context to that content is what we should do to infuse quality and infuse quality and infuse quality. And yes, let our graduates be graduates of 2020 and not COVID graduates. And so our learners as well, exiting from the basic education system as well. Let us not label them at all. But how can we make sure we don't have to label them? It's quality. Go back and check and verify and verify. Tired as we are, we have to spend time more and more to ensure that we have quality products. Why did we call final year students at the University of Namibia back for sit-in exams? It's about that job market. What do we do as citizens sitting here when they go for an interview? Oh, is this a UNAM student? Is this a NAS student? Look how weak they are in their interviewing skills. Rote learners, all they could do is to study and regurgitate things back. That's how we criticize our own students of these private and public institutions. What do we have to do? Is to make sure we infuse quality in that end product that's going to hit the job market. Employability of a student should be the core and the order of the day from the beginning of year one. Because we should look at the end goal. And that's why you have to have platforms like portfolios like Mahara for reflective learning. A student must map his or her learning journey throughout the process, and that must be quality assured. It must be assessed with quality in mind. And if it's weak, it's weak. And if it's good, it's good. And it should be labeled as such. So I hope I didn't deviate a lot from what you asked, but I attempted, and I'm going to leave the tough question of the end to the colleagues
hopefully
as well.
we'll revisit that again. But right now I'd like to ask, I've also received already some questions from our online platforms, but I'd like to ask Ms. Caroline, given this new culture of learning, how does it affect the future of conventional education and conventional quality assurance mechanisms? Ms. Caroline, are you there? Oh, she's having technical difficulties. So perhaps I will then redirect my question to Ms. Erabon.
Thank you so much. Yes, the new culture of learning, teaching, and building what we still know as the education is leading the child through, accompanying the child or the learner through all the developmental stages in order to then enter what we call adult life or the pre-adult, which is then the university. So yes, I think it has called us all to reflect further on our way of doing things in terms of maintaining an active learning process, because what we aspire to is achieving the 20th century skills. And what we often find is that we lack the creativity. And if we talk of our job seekers failing at interview panels, perhaps they had not that opportunity from early on to maintain their creative strength, because we know that every child is born with a hidden potential, with a full potential, and education's task is to unlock that potential. And often we find that the standards that we set are not taking into consideration the knowledge base that is there, and then building on that, and therefore fostering the creativity and the critical thinking and all the other higher order thinking skills. So for what makes it now for the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture a bit challenging is that we have just gone through a major curriculum review process, which intended to make our curriculum more responsive to the current needs and, of course, what we say the 20th century needs, so the 21st century needs. So that is now where we also say we educate now for a future that's not known to us. And that is the balance that we have to strike from within. I also witnessed the celebration of the Teacher Day celebration with the union. And what was mentioned there also by the guest speakers and the union was, we are yet to develop that curriculum that speaks to our needs. So it's what we have to embrace is what are our needs, and then structure accordingly. But there's also that, how shall I say, that root or the absolute minimum basics that we all need to rely on. You have to have a particular knowledge base in order to function creatively. So that is the balance. But I think we can do a lot more in terms of access to skills development, the basic pre-vocational skills that we have introduced, and we just need to open up and expand there, because we have to walk now the talk, as this reform has said. We want to be more responsive to the needs, and that is the skilled workforce.
Thank you. I have I received 3 questions. The one is actually directed towards you as well, but just very briefly, which office is responsible for quality assurance for secondary education e-learning materials?
That all learning materials would be quality assured by the National Institute for Educational Development. Those are the custodians for the curriculum.
Thank you. So that was a question from the online audience. The next question that I have is, what are the structural and cultural implications, and what did COVID-19 epidemic inflict on the higher education quality assurance in relation to assessment of students? Can I perhaps ask from APEN, Mr. Murangi?
Thank you very much. I think that was the biggest challenge. And I want to be as brief as possible also. Because if we are having this conference today, we, as a nation, we might be asking for more schools to be built. Is that the route we are going to go with a new normal? That's a first, just a remark. And with regard to the market out there, we want to have graduates or graduates coming in with confidence that they studied at institutions that went through thorough quality assurance processes, being boosted and promoted by our own NQA. That's what should happen. But with regard to assessment during COVID-19, you might have seen or heard over the news that you had to change from different modes, where you had to submit assignments instead of having to sit in for exams due to regulations that were put in place. Some institutions had to go to online assessment to try and recover as much or have as much interaction as possible in terms of what you can do with online services. But it was a troublesome process, and that is what makes each and every graduate that had to go through this process a very deserving graduate, because the challenges were different but unique. You had to really counter each and every challenge. If you had an institution of private higher learning that had to sit back and say, okay, good, I'm not getting funding from the government, I'm not getting assistance from anyone, and you sit back, they would not have been here. So it was really a challenging one. And as a chairperson of AFAIN, I would stand here very proud and applaud all those institutions, regardless whether they're private or public, that we have done something that is going to put Namibia in a different direction moving forward. I might not have answered the question directly, but it's with emotions and feelings that are positive.
Okay, so the next question also comes from the online audience, but I want to pose it to two of you. First to Ms. Gertze and then to Mr. Lupatla. So looking to the future, could the admission requirements for universities be adapted to cater for e-learning? In other words, learners must have access to a computer or a laptop, in this case, must possess one, internet, and be computer literate. That is sort of as your basic requirement that supplements whatever you're doing. Would adapting these admission requirements improve quality online learning? So that's the question. So first, Ms. Gertze, and then Mr. Lupatla.
Yeah, I would say that with that minimum requirement, it would then play a vital role in really assuring that you get the quality in both in learning and in being assessed, because we are looking into a future of blended learning, which then would include online classes and face-to-face classes. We cannot shy away from that. Online is going to stay with us. This is even topics that we have had in discussion to say we need to revisit minimum requirements to our entry candidates or our new intakes at the universities, that they need to have a laptop, a gadget, and internet connection, so that we are assured that if we then impose online learning to the students, that they are well capable of taking on the online learning journey, and then to make sure that it is a success. And I also believe that we need to introduce computer literacy from a young level. So let's say from grade 12, that this needs to be integrated in their curriculum so that they come in the universities with computer literacy. Because I know that at first year entry level, you have 2 basic courses which then equipped you with computer literacy. And I think this then needs to be integrated in early learning and not at a university level, because it is assumed that when you enter university that you need to be computer literate, but it is to our surprise that most of the students, or some of the students, it's their first time using a computer, or their first time encountering an experience with a computer. So if this is advocated, or if this is pushed from a younger level, which is now our grade 12, it would really help in the essence of the future being online learning and the success in both online teaching and learning and being assessed in that regard. So yes, I think it would play a vital role in the assurance of quality in both online teaching and then online assessment.
However, now I'm going to rephrase this question a little bit differently, and I would have loved it if you would have answered it.
Okay.
But be as it may, we'll move on to Mr. Lupatla. If you do that as a minimum requirement, though, and granted that it might or might not, improve your quality online learning experience, but aren't you excluding a large number of potential students who then wouldn't have the access to education? And since we have, like our accessibility tools, access to education, etc., how would that affect it? If we're now saying that if you don't have a laptop or internet, then I'm sorry, but you cannot access higher education.
Thank you very much once again, Chair. I think my point of departure would be what I said previously, that we knew about the status quo about 8 years or more back. And if we say we are going to change admission requirements to provide for only students who have this and that, we definitely know once again that we are not going to achieve that in the next 10 years. So we'll exclude a range of students within the next 10 years. Maybe we'll get them after 10 years. Equity and access remain key pillars in our education system. And we should tie the selection criteria or the student selection to the support services that are rendered by our institutions. We are aware we'll get computer illiterate students who, however, have good content dominion. It's unfortunate. I will refer to frameworks like the TPAC framework. The TPAC framework, which talks of the integration of technology, pedagogy, and content. And why I'm saying this is equally, as much as we are saying we may admit students with only ICT skills, we may not have such staff members at university. Back in 2015, I think it was the Education Forum, there was a resolution that came and it disappeared, where someone insisted the academic staff must be given time to work on their pedagogical skills because most of them were not trained as teachers professionally. And Cordell indicated they have short-term quick fix issues about training. So if you want to do that for the students' selection, equally ensure an equivalent support service from the academic staff because there are a lot who are not yet ready to implement this system. I don't want to go into details, but
Yeah.
TPAC deals with that.
Thank you. Mr. Murangi, I want to come to you, and because the online audience is also asking more questions, so it just shows how engaging the session is. But my question to you is, it's noted that quality assurance activities were barred when COVID-19 erupted in eventually traditional site visits. So I'm talking about specifically now private institutions, how they were affected by activities being interrupted by the NQA. And this is where, for accreditation, for assessment and audit purposes, right? So what would you suggest as new innovative arrangements for the NQA and other quality assurance agencies in general?
Great. What has happened, as I mentioned earlier on, we have been we have had a very engaging setup that was facilitated by the ministry through both the NQA and NCHA. So the very first move that came across there, quality assurance was a question. We are now in COVID. How are we going to deal with quality assurance? So for some period, I might not be correct, but I think for the first month or two, we had it postponed in terms of site visits because that was practically not possible in terms of traveling limitations and stuff like that. But in due course, they have resumed. So there were practices that needed activities that needed to take place, such as examinations. Now, if you have an institution that is accredited based on a specific mode of training, subsequently to the specific assessment, you need to engage the qualification authority at some point to give them the alternative that you are about to undertake and to see how they recognize it, because it is one of the things that will be coming to us when you do. So that's what many of the institutions does. And this is not an ad hoc arrangement. It was an urgent arrangement that we needed to take in place. And through that, we had consultations with the NQA, and we came up with the best solution possible for the institution, and also to ensure that the student or the learner that leaves that institution after the assessment has been taken care of, and quality assurance was key and has been played. And also conveniently, of course. Okay, did I answer correctly this time? Or do you want to happen again?
No. I mean, there are no right or wrong answers on this. Actually, I will let the online audience determine that, because usually they'll give a thumbs up or a love
Thank
or
you,
something.
thank you. I can see the love and the thumbs up.
So Dr. Beerkes, there's a question. Where do the exams departments of the universities fit in online assessments? And what about the moderation of online assessments that also form part of quality assurance?
Thank you, Prof. Peters. As you know, universities had to also make quick decisions during COVID. Like, for an example, where there was a formal examination previously to end sort of a course or a module in a semester. During COVID, we had to rethink that and reverted back to perhaps a continuous assessment mark that had to then formulate or form part of the final mark of that course for that semester. So the exams departments still fit, because what we managed to do as an institution is we were able to take those moderated exam papers, and as a rule in our institution, first and third year papers of courses at first and third year level are always moderated internally, and second and fourth year are moderated externally. And we were able to still make use of those quality assured papers and translate them into the online exams that are currently taking place. So the role was still there, it's still befitting. In future, one must look at it, because I was just having a discussion with our acting registrar yesterday that the colleagues in the examination departments within universities must now be trained for the new norm as well. They need to become part of supporting the very few that are actually now ensuring these exams can take place online. The skill sets will have to be reskilled, and we have to think about how we are doing it. But if we look at the moderation part, that was one thing that we also had to rethink as a university. We had to adjust our paper-based moderation tool to reflect online aspects of an online assessment, be it an assignment or test or an examination as well. We had to come up with checklists in that regard, and they were never there before, because our moderation tools mostly addressed, a physical hard copy paper written in a physical venue. So we had to readdress some of those things and re-looked at them and adjusted them, just like quality for E, that we also had to look at different guidelines and things like that. So yes, they still fit. We just have to rethink and reskill to make sure the online exams will not fall through the cracks in terms of the quality that they also need to. And that's why we took the already moderated papers and translated them into online exams.
So, okay, I was going to fire off the last question, actually. So, we have a question.
Yeah, well, thank you for the fascinating presentations and responses. We are talking about the end game, utopian game, the desired game. In the meantime, we have to transition. And that transition comes with its myriad of challenges which were highlighted during the presentation. Now, for an entity like the NQA, if a student has set for final exams, supposedly, but not having the soft or hard way, what would you recommend we should do? First question, a mild one to Dr. Hamis based on the presentation and the rest of the panel. The question is, you are referring to Moodle and given its 4 pillars. Now, Moodle is one of the options available. What are the others looking at? And when a policy is being formulated, do you suggest or recommend that we should keep it open? The tools you use should not be the determining factor. You can just take an outcomes-based approach, look at the curriculum and do your assessment accordingly as long as it's virtual. I was surprised when I was in Singapore that taxi drivers actually have virtual testing. They don't go in with their cars, but everything in that room is virtual. And it can be done, but the cost element is something we also need to consider. But I would have appreciated, Madam Chair, some pointers for success factors for a policy. What should be embedded in such a policy?
Okay, so so going forwad from here, I would have actually, this panel would have been complemented if we had NCHE and NQA on it, because I have a myriad of questions actually for those 2 entities. But since they are not on the panel, let us do our concluding remarks shortly. But Ms. Gertze, I think there are 2 comments actually for you as well, but I'll leave the other one and just ask you from the student perspective, how did you find the quality assurance process went throughout everything? You know, you had online assessments, you didn't have examinations. Did you have online examinations? How was that process from a student perspective?
Like it was mentioned before, this pandemic came, it caught us all off guard. So it left us with no choice but just to work with what we had. And really, from a student perspective, coming from NUST, I could say we struggled because we put our education on hold for a period of time just so that we analyzed the whole situation. And again, there was a highlight of fear of digital division, which is what can online cause. And because of this, we had to pause and rethink on how we can accommodate all students. So there was actually a blended version of teaching and assessing. Since the very first beginning, we had online teaching and learning, which I would say it was successful to a certain extent, and we had our fair challenges that I think the university is working on to improve. And in terms of assessment, it was mostly done online, but a lot of disciplines or degrees offered could not allow assessments to be done online because of being monitored by external bodies, which then is a factor that you cannot assess a student in an unconditioned premises or without supervision. So for our university, we had online teaching and learning, and also to a certain extent online continuous assessments, which I think it was successful given the fact that the pandemic caught us off guard and we were not as prepared. But moving forward, we could learn from our mistakes and enhance our online teaching and learning, and put emphasis on quality assurance in first teaching and learning, and then in the regard of assessments. Because I made this point, there cannot be a variation in the way a student is taught and in the way they're assessed, because what am I being assessed on if I'm not going to be assessed on what I was taught? So my experience in online learning, I think we can do a lot better than what we did thus far. There is a lot of improvement that can be made, and we can learn from our international universities, also from our other university that has been doing it for quite a while. For us, this is something new. So I think we need to take on a journey of benchmarking with different universities and seeing on how they are doing it, how they are being assured, or how they are assuring their quality in terms of teaching and learning, and also in terms of online assessment.
Thank you so much. So for the concluding remarks, please just very briefly think of at the top of your head what is that, and then fire that off. It's recommendations for the NQA and other quality assurance agencies, including the professional bodies. What recommendations do we have for moving forward in assuring quality throughout the entire value chain of education? Mr. Lupatla?
Yes, again, I will go back to say, let's go back to all the research that has been done. There are a lot of good suggestions there that have already been made. And let's bring these recommendations onto the table and implement them vis-a-vis the policies that are there. Implementation of our policies has been identified as the biggest challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.
From my side, just to say that I think an active dialogue between all partners here is essential. That is, all institutions, the ministries, as well as the student bodies. So that is my wisdom. In the Ministry of Education, we try that, as well as to say just that in order for the future to continue the blended approach, and we also, similar to what the UNAM has done, where the Center for Excellence, or not, say the Open Learning Institute was the active driver. For us, it's the College of Open Learning, NAMCOL, that digitalizes our secondary curriculum.
Thank you. Mr. Murangi?
Thank you. I thought about it very quick. We need to redefine the mandates of the regulators and the institutions. Some tasks are really overlapping and probably also conflicting. So when we redefine the structures in our regulators and directors, then we're really going to have core institutions focusing on core issues such as quality assurance to ensure that each and every learn our student that completes an education is a proud, educated Namibia, because the education that they have gone through has been quality assured.
What would be the role, sorry, the role of the professional institutions? Because we just heard that some of the examinations are required to be face-to-face because the professional institutions are asking for that.
Rephrase that again. Was that
The
for me?
professional bodies,
Yes.
for, you know, like the engineering council, etc. Some of them were insisting that that it needs to be face to face. It couldn't be handled virtually because of the quality assurance aspect. So how do we incorporate them or bring them onto the table? And I know that engineering council wants to say something, but please, just a last thinking about that.
Yeah, that is because of Lecon's consultation. You know, we did not have to wait to get there. You know, we had to had all these guns all fired up in terms of consultation and knowing what the requirements are. Be it said, you know, professional bodies are professional bodies, you know. But is it the perception, or is it something that we can really just calm down and bring it to a more community-based setup? Because we have only one Namibia that we need to look at. And if we have professionals that are linking to external factors or other institutions beyond Namibia borders, then we're not speaking to the right audiences. So that is a dimension that I think needs a lot of research so that we can come together.
Dr. Very, very briefly.
Just very briefly, I think this whole pandemic really brought in a huge challenge for especially the engineering profession, the training in engineering. Apart from the practical aspects that you have to examine, there are also the analytical aspects, which a lot of us have not mastered how to use, for example, Moodle to set those type of exams. So you don't want a student to just give you the final answer. You want to see the process, how he arrived at the final solution. We used to make fun with students when they give us final answer and they get maybe 1 mark and they're like, but I got the final answer. I said, yes, you can take off a plane, but if you don't know how to land it, yeah, then there is a big problem. So we have to teach you how to take off, but we also have to teach you how to land. So I think it's a big challenge for us in the engineering fraternity. We need to master that, and it's not impossible. It is possible to do it online.
Thank you so much. I'm getting pressure here, and I don't know whether I should exercise executive power or whether I should be, you know, one of the team players. I'll be one of the team players. I will allow the NASFAF to make a comment because that is what I got, and also NCHE to just make a brief comment as well on this. Please, the floor is yours. Could you use Ms. Pamela's?
Thank you very much. My name is David. I'm representing the Namibia Students Financial Assistance Fund. Our comment to this, we are very much excited to see that the Ministry of Higher Education is doing its best with all the SOEs and institutions to bring about quality, to see how we can save our students given the challenges that we are facing now because of COVID-19. And also change, we learn change is the only constant. And then with this change, we need to develop strategies so that we can actually alleviate those challenges that we are faced with. From the NASFAF point of view, together with the ministry, the minister already indicated that those that will be funded by NASFAF will be given the support in terms of those internet gadgets as well as the laptops. I think this is a noble thing from the ministry and government that they are committed to see to it that students, those in need of those gadgets, they should get those gadgets. Now, on the other side of things, we know that e-learning is probably going to, or the blended mode, is probably going to alleviate pressure in terms of cost at institutions of higher learning. We will look at the other side. We are dealing with funds or funding thereof to see to it to say our interest is to see, will there be additional costs that probably going to put pressure on NASFAF, or will we see that the cost of tuition might be reduced so that we can be able to fund more students? And I think we all know that the demand for funding will increase tremendously because of the new curriculum that is introduced, that will see those that are exiting at ordinary level will be able to enroll more, maybe at diploma level, and the others will be taking up degrees. So there will be high demand, but the meager resources that we have, they are very few. So if there is such reduction in costs, we will really appreciate so that we can fund more students.
I'll just chuckle. Ms. Dimas from NCHE.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank NQA for organizing the summit. We really appreciate the discussions. I don't want to repeat what other speakers have said before, but I just want to really re-echo that our success factor, especially in the subsector of higher education and particularly also on quality assurance, was that we were able to organize ourselves immediately, at the onset of the pandemic. Our role as NCHE was to assess the need and advise on planning approach. And immediately after we have assessed the need, through the leadership of the ministry, we were able to divide labor amongst ourselves. NCAG taking the planning and advisory approach, NQA taking the quality assurance approach, and at the later stage when we knew at what cost we needed to implement these interventions, then NASFAF had the responsibility of mobilizing whatever equipment or devices that were needed by the students. So this really helped us and kept us, focused in terms of planning. Now that we are here and we are talking about the lessons, and we indeed, succeeded in putting in place the emergency support that we needed to do, we really, this kind of platform, and as Ms. Bond have said, we now need to continue engaging each other so that we put together a sustainable policy and strategies so that, we can race beyond this should future, disaster strike again, but also for our own country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Since we are so over time, I am going to cut off here. I'm so sorry that I didn't get your concluding remark. But we will. Which question?
The one about tools and policy directive about should it, for an example, only be Moodle or should it, for an example, only be, I mean, that was a very critical question in my opinion, and I know time is really of the essence here, but we could also skip it if the audience...
Yeah, I think that we have extracted the recommendations. The question was referring also to very specific recommendations that we can take forward from here. So he's also expressed a wish from that. Extracting from all of your interventions, and especially your presentation, there is actually quite a lot to be gleaned on that. What I want to say that this was very insightful. However, I think that the conversation cannot end here. And this is what was also said in the, expressed in the remarks, that the conversation should go forward, because there's a lot of underlying things. We have now heard from the key stakeholders also within the room, but as I said, we also have many of the professional bodies where there was a lot of questions on the quality assurance processes throughout this COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you so much, and I'd like to ask Mr. Gertzer So you have some of the recommendations, the specific question that you want to have delving into the tools. Dr. Beatrice Amos is one of our experts here who could also assist in this and could be asked. Thank you so much once again.
Yes, I think the fact that we've gone well over time is an indication that this is such a critical discussion. And to your point, Prof. Peters, a conversation which definitely shouldn't end here. Such a rich and insightful and stimulating discussion that we've had, presentations here today. And I think Dr. Samuel John has earlier already, during his remarks, he's extended the vote of thanks on behalf of the Namibia Qualifications Authority. And again, I would just like to reiterate and say thank you so much to our valuable and experienced guests that joined the summit. I don't need to go through the names again, but also thank you to our virtual or online community who participated and who also added to a fruitful deliberation this morning. Once again, thank you so much. And that, of course, was the NQA Virtual Summit 2020 under the theme, The Dimensions of Quality Assurance in Education During COVID-19. All presentations, speeches, and a full recording of the summit will be uploaded on the social platforms of the NQA, including the website as well as the YouTube channel and Facebook. If you still have questions from our viewers, I believe that it's really an interesting topic. Please do send through those questions to the following email address. That is marketing@namqa.org. marketing@namqa.org. And we will take it from there. On that note, from myself, Rochelle Locke, your program director, it's been a great pleasure hosting the NQA Virtual Summit 2020. Until next time, goodbye.
Thank you, colleagues.